is absolutely right that now, and I think everybody I know who, I spend a lot of time in Africa, and everybody I know who has been watching the African Continental Free Trade Agreement has just been astonished with the speed at which the agreement has come together. Steve is right though, there's a binding agreement amongst countries, but a lot of the issues are still being worked through. So that right now it's moving into the rules, and investment is one of the other things, which I think is worth noting because there's a bigger debate on investment across trade agreements. So that's also investment competition. I think digital trade is not yet part of the official agenda. It's investment competition and intellectual property and dispute settlement. And Steve, I think we should do a family tree for GSP and the other preference programs. I would be curious to see what those would look like at this point. But Orit, I'm going to turn to you, and maybe you can also tell everybody a little bit about the American Leadership Initiative and what it is, because I think it's really, you're really generating an important discussion around some of these issues. And I do hope that you'll talk about capacity building and that aspect, development assistance, how to really make sure that everything is working well on the ground and in practice. And then we'll turn right to questions from the audience after that. So Orit, I turn to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Catherine and WITA. So I just wanted to kind of take a step, bring it up a little bit. Why, so number one, there's wide agreement that trade helps developing countries get out of poverty. So I just wanted to kind of take that one step up. I mean, even since 1990, trade with developing countries has doubled and the poverty rate has gone to half. So, these programs have an overwhelmingly positive effect. And in spite of that, if we take out China and India, developing countries still have a really uphill battle in accessing developed country markets. And I think, helping these countries grow is important, both in terms of, clearly humanitarian goals, but also, in terms of contributing to U.S. national security, and then of course, markets for U.S. products. So I'm working on the American Leadership Initiative, and part of our premise really is that we need to look, we want to develop a path for America to restore American global leadership going forward, and part of that really is to look at trade, development, and diplomacy in a more integrated fashion. And how do they work? What is a new vision for American leadership on that front? So I'm going to look at three elements that we could use to improve access for developing countries and help them take better advantage of the trade benefits. First, while overall tariffs in the U.S. are low, I think we all know that key exports from developing countries, which are ag, textile, footwear, apparel, meet very high tariffs. So, first of all, we at the American Leadership Initiative really support the proposals by GAP and others to really expand GSP to apparel, footwear, and maybe ultimately other things to really improve the access of developing countries to U.S. markets. I mean, there's a certain irony that these programs are there to help these countries, but in fact, they aren't able to access the programs for some of the products that are their key exports. Second, many developing countries face huge barriers in accessing U.S. markets altogether, really making it hard for them to obtain the benefits of the trade preferences that they receive or the trade agreements that they're part of. Many of these obstacles include everything from, they don't have an adequate regulatory environment, they don't have the right legal infrastructure, they don't have transportation to get to a port to ship their product, and there could be a whole host of anti-competitive behaviors in the country, corruption, other things like that. So that's where trade capacity building comes in, which is, very simply helping these countries be able to trade. And it really plays a vital role in helping these countries really garner the benefits of trade. In 2016, the US government invested about $1.2 billion in trade capacity building that went to 132 countries, which, I guess my math is about 9 million a country. So it's actually a really small amount, you know, for what is really a big bang for buck. Most of this aid was delivered through USAID and MCC, but there's a whole range of agencies involved, from state, commerce, labor, agriculture. You know, they all have programs, which, by the way, are not very well coordinated. The largest piece of trade capacity building, about a third of it right now, goes to infrastructure development, roads, rails, ports. Second largest piece goes to labor capacity building, which is about 15%. The rest of it is spread pretty widely across all sorts of other initiatives, from standards training, customs, environmental standards, and trade promotion. So recent trade agreements like TPP and still out there, and USMCA have included some provisions for trade capacity building, transparency, anti-corruption in them, which I think is a really big step forward, helping some of those countries, in fact, access the markets that we're trying to give them. But in general, this funding needs to be really expanded dramatically and really supplemented by increased funding for, in particular, rule of law and good governance training. Rule of law is a very important basic building block for intellectual property rights, you know, making contracts enforceable, you know, enforcing labor rights, human rights, religious freedom, gender equality, and much more. All of those are really vital to advancing, you know, commerce, but also American values and national security. And while, you know, the US government does provide some funding for rule of law training, it's delivered through a very, very wide variety of agencies and programs. They don't coordinate well with each other, and they don't really coordinate well with other trade capacity building initiatives. So third, I think in order to get better outcomes, we need to really integrate global development programs, trade policy, and some of our diplomatic initiatives into a single agenda, you know, which is also something that we don't do very well. You know, for instance, you know, we negotiated CAFTA with Central America, which was a great agreement. But had we, you know, you can sort of imagine, had we been much more generous with trade capacity building in those countries, you know, over right when the agreement was negotiated and over a consistent period of time, and really invested a lot in rule of law training in those countries, you know, they might have been able to develop the infrastructure, hard infrastructure, but also the legal and good governance infrastructure to attract much more investment, you know, which would have led to the creation of many good jobs, which, you know, might have ultimately resulted in people being able to stay there, and, you know, might have mitigated some of the, you know, issues we're seeing now at our border. So, you know, these things are really interrelated, and I think it's important to try to look at them in a holistic way in government programs. So in sum, I think if we want to create an environment for developing countries to prosper and take better advantage of the global trading system, you know, we need really a multifaceted approach. We need to make our markets more open to their programs by ensuring that GSP and the preference programs are expanded, really to be accessible to a larger number of countries and mostly to their key exports. And we need to coordinate our trade policy with expanded capacity building, focusing on the rule of law. And finally, all these programs really need to be integrated and coordinated with each other and with our foreign policy goals.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Marie. Thank you for that. Thank you also for keeping to time.
At the last one, I went to.
I think that I'd like to open up to the audience, since we have a packed room and so many experts in the room here this morning. I thought maybe we could open it up for questions. Here's what I think we should do, though, just to make sure that we structure this well. I think we should take several questions for the panel at once. Maybe we'll do them in batches of 3, and then give the panelists a chance to respond. Not every panelist has to respond to every question. Give them a chance to respond to the questions that they think relate most to their focus. Then we can go back for another batch of questions. I might throw some questions in too, but I'll save mine and turn to all of you first. So we have a microphone. Please raise your hand. Please tell us who you are and what your affiliation is, and go ahead with your question.
Hello, my name is Jan Poorest. I'm a customs and trade consultant and lawyer, and I wanted to talk about the problem of lack of technical assistance for developing countries. I've done a lot of work in Africa, and there's been a huge problem with countries being able to understand the requirements for AGOA, and so many of them have not bothered to try. I've been going around mostly in West Africa for the last 3 years, trying to teach people how to comply with AGOA. But this is something that the US government should be providing in some way, and it's not. And I think it's also a problem for other parts of the world, but my particular experience is in Africa.
Thank you, Jen. Yes. Oh, wait. Okay, yes. And then over here, too.
Yeah, mine are also sort of comments more than questions. Just to clarify on some of what Steve Landy was doing, graduation from GSP is not the same as the consideration of WTO developing country status. GSP graduation is mandatory if a country becomes high income on the World Bank lists. There's a bit of a lead time on that, although competitiveness criteria is a little different. Least developed status was originally based on the listing in the UN, although that's been a little bit, it's not, the law doesn't specifically highlight how you graduated from that. But in fact, the least developed status, when Ed mentioned the 3,500 lines, there are an additional approximately, I think, 1,400 lines that are reserved for least developed countries. Many of those countries have difficulty using them because of the kind of issues that Orit was pointing out about infrastructure. But there are some very interesting examples of success, my favorite being Cambodian bicycles. There are some bicycles coming in from Cambodia. Bicycles are not normally GSP eligible, but they are from least developed. Some smart person figured that one out. And then on AGOA graduation, that gets back to what Katrin said about that AGOA is somewhat linked to GSP, so it becomes complicated for a place like South Africa. And then I just also wanted to mention that the Millennial Challenge Corporation is also run out of Ed's office, and that does do some interesting work.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Naomi.